Anyway, here we go. Thank you so much to everyone for coming. Good evening. My name is Lynn Erickson, and I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the Da Vinci Science Center. And we're excited that you all could join us this evening for what is certain will be a thought-provoking event. Of course, we'd rather be with you in person and be able to host a true networking session. But now, since we're all expert Zoom users, as we were just testing out, right? Most of us anyway, we can do a little networking in the chat. The chat, it's at the bottom of your screen if you're not familiar. Please feel free to say hello, where you work or where you are from, and anything else you want to share with the group. The Da Vinci Science Center, I think many of you on the screen I actually know, so you're pretty familiar, is a hands-on science center dedicated to bringing science to life and lives to science for students and families throughout the Lehigh Valley, Eastern Pennsylvania, and Western New Jersey. At Da Vinci, we're passionate about supporting women in STEM fields and inspiring young girls to follow in their footsteps. We're excited to bring this program to you during the week of International Women's Day. It was out of our passion for supporting women in STEM that the WISE initiative was born. And we'll share a little bit more about the initiative later in the program, but I do want to say that initiatives like WISE are more important now than ever because women hold 49% of all jobs in the region, but they represent just 29% of the STEM workforce. They have the lowest representation in the engineering and computer and mathematical sciences, where much of the growth in STEM jobs is occurring, even with the job losses we have seen because of COVID. The growing demand for a STEM workforce can be met by hiring more women to work in these fields. So it's our job to encourage and support today's young girls so that they can become tomorrow's STEM workforce. And this, I'd like to share a little story with you that reinforces the work that we're all doing to mentor young girls and how important it is. This story was sent by one of you, one of the women in our WISE network, and we took out the names. But feel free if you would like to identify yourself in the chat. You wrote, "My older daughter is in the process of choosing a college. She does not know which school yet, but she is sure of a major in biology or biochemistry. I wanted to give recognition and encouragement to the WISE community and all of the women in promoting STEM in the Lehigh Valley. I think the community had a big influence on my daughter. This included the GEMS program at Muhlenberg that she attended in 8th grade, and the robust Junior Pennsylvania Academy of Science, and the lessons that Da Vinci Science Center brought to her Allentown schools. In any case, as we navigate choosing a college without college visits because of COVID, I wanted to just remind everyone that your efforts to support girls' interest in STEM are important, and they work." I'm sharing that story because it's the perfect example of why the WISE initiative, why all of you being here tonight is so important. By the way, we have several high school students with us. This story also demonstrates how two women and their family are successfully navigating a major milestone during this really difficult time. Thank you to the mom who shared this with us. Please feel free to say much more about it in the chat. And I think this is the perfect time to turn the program over to the inspiring women who will share their stories with us. Before I do that, I'd like to take a few moments to recognize the groups and organizations who made tonight's event possible. Thank you to ATAS International Inc., Air Products, Beat Braun, Reach Cyber Charter School, Highmark, and Sanofi. We are also proud to say that the WISE initiative is supported by a grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services. And now to the main event. Tonight, we'll hear from 3 women who will share their professional and personal perspectives with us. As you can see on this agenda, after their comments, we'll allow time for Q&A and discussion and to hear from you about your I'm good COVID stories. There are some good COVID stories. I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, Dr. Cara Massetti, Medical Director, Healthcare Epidemic, Network Medical Staff Physician, St. Luke's Infectious Disease Associates. Shonda Morales, Women's Mindful Empowerment Mentor, therapist and author of several books, including her latest, which I just purchased, by the way, Breathe, Empower, Achieve. Dr. Amy Snyder, Vice Chair, Quality, Patient Safety, Department of Medicine, Lehigh Valley Health Network, Infectious Diseases. In addition to their very, very busy professional lives, in which you'll all hear about in a moment, all of these ladies are juggling parenting and caregiving along with their careers, something we can all relate to. Welcome to all of you. We also have Pat and Caroline from the Science Center, who will be helping to field questions and keep things running smoothly. Caroline is one of our newest staff members. She's our Director of Communications, and hopefully will be helping us all communicate smoothly this evening. Pat is an educator and our WISE Forum liaison. Pat joined the Science Center close to 3 years ago, following her retirement from Sanofi Pasteur as Associate Vice President R&D, where together with a tremendous group of scientists, she researched, developed, and licensed new vaccines. The perfect individual to put together this program for us. Pat, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Lynn, and thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to be here with you this evening, and I just want to echo Lynn's thank you to all of you for being here and for all that you do. I think the light is getting brighter for sure at the end of the tunnel. So thank you all for that. What we'll do now is enough from us is to turn it then over to our first speaker, Amy. And there is Amy.
Hello, let me just pull up my slides. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. All right, well, thank you for having me. My name is Dr. Amy Snyder. I'm an infectious disease physician at Lehigh Valley Health Network. My talk is going to be on being a working female and managing during the pandemic. There we go. So almost a year ago, my kids were sent home from school. They had all of their books in their backpack and a twinkle in their eye, and they told me they probably weren't going back to school on Monday. And then my life seriously changed. So before that, I was doing a lot. I was juggling being a doctor. I was working at a city STD clinic, at an HIV clinic, doing a lot with quality and patient safety for the hospital. I had my job at home, being a mom, wife, and a daughter. I did some of the household chores. I did a lot of exercise. I ran a ton and I did a lot of yoga. And then after that day, I was doing all of the same things I had been doing, but then I got like 10 new assignments at work. So I had to learn how to do virtual visits. I was giving presentations all over the hospital. I had to do news and media segments about COVID. We had to work with our data analytics team to figure out how to track patients. I was in charge of the COVID-19 treatment steering committee, which I'll tell you a little bit more about. I was working on different treatment options like convalescent plasma, monoclonal antibodies, and I was involved in clinical trials, talking to schools and reviewing a lot of protocols. The biggest change for me was the nonstop phone calls and texting. So what had been some period of silence after work ended now was just filled with ringing and dinging from text messaging, which was a huge transition for me. And then I had all my same jobs at home, but I also became a teacher. I was doing the computer tech stuff for the kids, started ordering more takeout dinners, and I had to transition to more efficient types of exercise. So I couldn't run as long. I would do sort of short distance, and we were doing a lot of skiing because what else can you do in the winter during a pandemic? So my biggest change at work was I was given the opportunity to lead the COVID-19 treatment steering committee. So in the beginning of the pandemic, so many people were getting sick. We had nothing to treat patients with, and the data was coming quickly, but it was not high quality. With, usually we get very robust clinical trials that are evidence-based, but here we were reviewing a group of 10 patients who got this treatment and maybe they got better. It was not peer-reviewed literature, and it was being, things were coming sort of fast and furious. So that's kind of what we were dealing with. And in addition to that, the media was jumping on top of everything, and there was so much publicity about all these treatments So we very quickly assembled a treatment steering committee. So I led a multidisciplinary group that had doctors, nurses, and pharmacists from all of our sites, and we would decide on multiple treatment options very quickly. We met every day in the beginning, and now we have backed that up to twice monthly. But our job every day was to review all the literature that came in. We had to balance a lot of evidence versus emotion. So what was real science versus people just feeling like, I want to help someone, let's just try anything. So that was kind of the balance that we had to quickly find. We would publish our guidance quickly, make it apparent to everybody in the community and on the network. Then we would track utilization of different metrics and medications and give feedback if people weren't sort of following the rules, and then update. And then we would just keep repeating that cycle. And so it was very intense, but very rewarding at the same time. And then at home, I was balancing the second shift. And I'm sure a lot of ladies on this call will understand what I'm talking about. But many women are working, but also continuing to manage a huge part of the child and home care. Men spend a lot less time compared to women in what's called unpaid labor, so all the home chores. And men spend more time enjoying leisure activities than women. And this is compared to the fact that women have outpaced men in terms of college attendance and degrees for the past 20 years. But many women continue to choose to avoid the leadership route or maybe careers in science because they're still juggling so much at home as well. So I had a lot of strategies for sanity, juggling home and work. And my family's been super supportive. And my husband, he's also a physician, but he very quickly understood that I needed to be at work a lot more than I used to, and I had to be available to many more people. And he really helped me make that happen. One of the best things that came out of the pandemic for me personally was to learn how to do 3D puzzling. So I would recommend that to anyone who's interested in looking for a new hobby. I would put my phone away for 20 minutes on silence and do puzzling, and it was awesome. We cooked some new stuff. In the top right-hand corner, you can see I tried to cook octopus, which is very difficult. We did a lot of outdoor activity as well, so that was really calming. And then the other thing that sort of helped me out during all this was my work family. And so I have a lot of pictures here about the people that I work with. And it's not just my immediate work family, which is the infectious disease providers and people that work in infection control. I really felt at the hospital that we all went through a shared trauma, and it brought us closer together. So everyone that I see every day, the nurses, the physicians, the respiratory therapists, the pharmacists, the techs, we became, I think, a closer family throughout this pandemic. It's intense, and I'm sure we will continue for the next few months to work out what exactly happened and the stress of it all. But I definitely think it brought us together, and I really believed in these people, and they supported me, and I supported them through a very difficult time. And I wanted to bring you guys some perspectives that were not just mine to sort of round this about. So I talked to 3 female leaders in medicine to kind of get a little bit more about what they were feeling during the pandemic. So I asked, how has your job changed during the pandemic? And they responded, it changed completely. Everything shifted. All focus was redirected. I had to be adaptive and prioritize COVID and be resilient. How has being a female helped or hurt you during the pandemic? We live in a male-centric society. Decision makers continue to be men. One woman responded, I never felt my gender to be a factor. Another responded, I was surrounded by mostly women leaders on an amazing team, and being female was a benefit. We could empathize with each other. But in meetings with predominantly older men, I found my comments were not always supported. So some different feelings about that. How has your personal life changed during the pandemic? 12 to 14 hours a day, 7 days a week became the norm. My family was no longer my priority. Seeing patients become sick and die. I spent countless hours working with little reprieve, exhausted. I work from home. I don't get interpersonal connections anymore. My kids interrupt my work. I need to create boundaries. So some interesting thoughts about how the personal life and the work life kind of met together there. So, a lot of different perspectives from me and then from some females that I spoke to, but in conclusion, what I've taken away from the craziest year of my life is that change has been the only constant. The stress relief tactics and the support at home and at work was what kept me afloat. Second shift is a real issue. I personally struggled with it a lot during this, and all you can do is ask for help at home or maybe consider outsourcing, but think about a solution, because women in science is an important thing that we all need to continue to promote. I really learned about how perfect is the enemy of good. I think a lot of women in science are very type A. I really understood that I could not be 100% every day. I was 90%, maybe less, but I think a lot of the time that was good enough. And I think one of the things that I'm learning now is, as things start to get better and we're calming down, getting out of this emergency go, go, go mode has really been just as difficult as getting into it. So as I start to back away now, I'm really revved up, and it's really difficult to make that transition. And that's it for me. And here's my email. I'm happy to be contacted after this as well. And I know we'll have a question session at the end.
Okay, well, thank you, Amy, for that. I love the perfect is the enemy of good. That I'm going to adopt myself, although I don't at this point in time in my life have the stress levels that you have. But we did want to ask one question for you before we go on to Kara. And when will things get back to normal? It's a tough one.
Yeah, so super loaded question. Right now, the best estimates about when more than 90% of our nation will be vaccinated is towards the end of summer. But I keep telling people that I don't know that that's when we're going to get back to normal, because like I mentioned, how I'm trying to work myself out of this emergency mode. People are trying to sort of come down from this intense feeling of COVID is killing everyone I love, or it's not safe here, and I need to be super cautious all the time. And that is going to be hard to back away from too. So I think we're looking probably at another 6 to 12 months before we really start to feel like we can rest again.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Amy. So with that, Kara, we're going to turn it over to you.
I said, wow, this is such a unique opportunity to talk to a group of women and potentially young women who are still thinking about careers in STEM. Because I think I think my main takeaway from the pandemic was finding the silver lining. And I think the silver lining for this group of people is that I think it really highlighted a lot of unknown careers in the STEM field, and hopefully has inspired some young women and even men to consider science and medicine. I think it's brought to light things like infectious disease, immunology, microbiology, almost to the point of being a celebrity. I mean, Tony Fauci is like, a god to many people. It's funny, I was talking to a surgeon the other day and he said, wow, I didn't realize infectious disease was such a sexy specialty. I should have thought about this more in medical school. But I think, so when I thought about what to talk about, I thought, it might be important just to spend a couple minutes on how I navigated to where I was in my role in the pandemic, and also how I got through, and just to kind of give an example of how somebody becomes an infectious disease doctor and sort of the path. And it wasn't a straight, road for me. And I think may help put some perspective for those that are still considering. So in high school, I think many of you, all like science, biology, and understanding how things work. And I guess I had always thought about medicine, but, I loved basketball. I wanted to go to the best college that I could and have a good time and make friends. So I just picked the best school that I could get into, and I kind of went. So in college, I thought about medicine, but for anyone who's spent a lot of time around pre-meds, they're pretty intense and pretty intimidating. And at risk of dating myself, in college in the mid-90s, there was a lot of completely awesome science stuff going on. I put the cover of Science in the mid-90s was they actually published the human genetic linkage map. So this was the first time that we could map specific genetic diseases to parts of chromosomes. We didn't even sequence the human genome yet. So wow, that was amazing. And I, took my genetics class and did some work in a genetics lab. And this is the picture of Time magazine when David Ho was named Man of the Year. And he was one of the main physicians that helped understand the basic science of HIV. So this huge world pandemic going on could really be broken down into this one viral particle, which to me was just mind-boggling. I remember my first microbiology class and somehow being able to break it down into these molecular parts just kind of made me feel like there was more control over it. When I left college, I thought about getting a PhD, but I just never had confidence that I was creative enough or could become like an independent researcher. I couldn't even think about what I wanted to write for my PhD application. So I decided to go into working in the lab, and working in the pharmaceutical industry was much more lucrative than being paid almost minimum wage. But I kind of found myself always seeking out volunteer opportunities or more human connections. I volunteered at my local hospital, a local nursing home. I was an AIDS buddy. And then finally just realized, maybe medicine is not such a bad idea. And I kind of applied on my own. I didn't tell anybody I did it. And I got in, and it was obviously the best decision that I made. The medical school that I went to had a unique program that during your third year, you could pursue research opportunities. So I still kind of had the itch to go into science. So my third year of medical school, I spent at the NIH Clinical Center. And that was actually my first brush with Tony Fauci. I actually worked in a immunology lab that was technically under his institute. I met him one time, and he is sort of exactly how he appears on the news. He's this short, like 5'7" guy. He goes 100 miles an hour. But I spent a lot of my time doing translational research. So they had patients that would come to the clinical center that had HIV, and we took their immune cells and studied immune activation and how their immune system responded to HIV. The interesting thing that happened that year is that was the year of 9/11 and the anthrax scare at the Capitol building. So we actually thought about how we would write clinical protocols if we ever had anthrax patients present to the clinical center. So I think it was my first brush with, wow, infectious disease can be sort of exciting, and a lot of stuff going on. So ultimately, I decided to go into infectious disease because for me, it was the perfect meld between basic science. You had to understand virology and bacteriology, but then also seeing the clinical manifestations and being able to interact with patients and treat patients. I did some clinical research in my residency and fellowship, but ultimately my heart was really drawn to taking care of patients. In my job at St. Luke's, I think very similar to some of the work that Amy does, I do work in infection prevention and healthcare epidemiology. So understanding infections in the hospital, antibacterial resistance, and how we prevent patients who come into the hospital to get healthcare from getting infections while they're under our care. So it's funny, taking all of this into account, kind of COVID presents itself, and my husband, who's not medical, kind of laughs and said, "Oh my gosh, this is what you've been dreaming of your whole life, something like this to happen to you." And I was like, well, yeah, for an infectious disease doctor, things like this are exciting, not that we wish or hope that it happens, but in many ways, it kind of was the culmination of everything coming together. And okay, this is you, and you have to hit the ground running and figure out how we're going to take care of this. So I remember back to the first days, probably around this time last year, where we sat down in a big conference room and said, what is this thing? How is it going to look? And I think the challenge initially was just preparing for a hurricane. Is this going to be a little drizzle, or is this going to be a category 5? And, how do we make ourselves prepared? I think like Amy said, a lot of it was disease management. So this is what infectious disease doctors do. This is our clinical disease, and this is how we're going to treat it. We observe patients, we read the literature, that's what we trained. But I think the other part of it that I wasn't prepared for was just sort of the operational network management of it. So, how could a patient present in any corner of the network, in a primary care office, in urgent care, in the emergency room? How are we going to test them? How are we going to isolate them? Where are we going to put them? I think another huge thing too was people management. So there was a lot of fear at the beginning. Were nurses and healthcare workers going to show up and come to work? What was this disease about? Did we have enough personal protective equipment? And I think one of the big things that I started at the beginning just out of desperation, but sort of became a cult following, was just a daily email that we sent out with updates. I started doing vlogs, and the emails kind of turned out into almost like this little humorous, uplifting, here's a music video, here's something that I'm thinking about or I'm dealing with. And I think, I talk about at the bottom some of the positive things taking away, but just kind of the new roles, the new skills, the new parts of your personality that you develop sort of out of necessity. But I think that has kind of, made me discover, how I can give back to the network and the people I work with more than just being a doctor. I think the other challenge is it was always changing information. So you tell people something one day and then the next day it changed. And then I think just the long haul, we got through the initial surge, we got into the summer, everyone was great. And then people got tired and more cases came back. And how do you continue to motivate people to come to work and put on their PPE and see patients? I think, and now the biggest challenge is the vaccine rollout. And like Amy said, how do we convince people to, take this tool and help us get to the next level? And then life with COVID, I think, I would echo everything that Amy said. I think the biggest thing at the beginning was fear. Can I come home? Can I lay in the same bed with my husband? Can I kiss my son? Work-life balance. In many ways, my husband worked from home. My son was at home. So I could just kind of leave the house at any time of the day and everyone was taken care of. But at what point, is my family like, hey, when are you coming home? Are you having dinner with us tonight? Like, where are you? We haven't seen you for a couple days. I think the guilt all moms have about, kids spending too much time on electronics and how do you get them out and how do you get them socialized? I think the overwhelming pressure, again, being a perfectionist, feeling like in some days that I was the sole person responsible for the well-being of St. Luke's and all of its employees and all of its patients. And not that that was the case, but I think as women, we often take things on our shoulders and feel responsible. And I definitely agree with the stress addiction. There was one day where I realized that I was almost kind of sad when I saw our numbers going down, because I kind of felt like it was this race that you get addicted to. It's like I get up in the morning and I call into this call and I do this and I do that. And what's going to happen to me when I don't have that to do anymore? It sounds almost sort of sad, but for many people that have been in that world, it's just, this has defined me for so long. What am I going to do when this goes away? And then you say, wait a minute, this is not healthy. We need to move on and we need to get back to normal and we need to start sort of ramping down. I think my biggest coping skills was just putting it into perspective. I think trying every day to think of all the positive gifts that we had, spending time outside, spending time as a family, having movie night and taco night, and, just really appreciating the gifts that we had with our nuclear family that maybe we took advantage of before. And looking towards the future, now that things are getting calmer, a pandemic is not complete without getting a puppy. So we're picking up a puppy next weekend. So just when I thought life was getting simple again, it's not. But I think we're really excited. My son is an only child, and I think this is the perfect time to take the plunge and have something fun to look forward to. So that's my story.
Well, thank you, Kara. He's really cute too. You said so many things that I think touched each of us, and many of them touched probably many of us. And so really, thank you for being really open with your thoughts regarding your trials and tribulations through the pandemic. But before going on, I do have one question that we'd like to ask you. And as an infectious disease doctor, how did you feel about kids returning, or how do you feel about kids returning to school sports, activities, and then balancing the mental and social with the health and safety aspects of it?
Yeah, I think it's super important. I had the advantage that my son's school district allowed in-person instruction 5 days a week from the very beginning. So we kind of dove in, and it ended up being a really good opportunity. I think the studies out there have shown that when schools do the right thing with masking and distancing, they're really not a source of outbreaks or infection. I think the good news among kids is that, they don't tend to get COVID as much. And when they do, they tend to fare much better, probably much better than they had influenza. I think the same thing applies to activities, sports, and everything. I think if you follow the right precautions, they can be done safely. And I think for all of us now, more than a year into this, any parent on here realizes just the social needs that our kids have. So, everything in life is a risk benefit. You get in your car, you drive on 22, nothing is risk free. So for me, I think I realized that this was the small risk of sending my child out there into the world had such huge benefits that we just kind of had to do it. So.
Oh, great. Thank you for that. And then last, but certainly not least, especially since you're going to give us some tips on how to better handle our busy lives, I'm going to turn it over to Shonda.
Hello. Thank you. Okay, so we can go to the first slide. Great. Oh, nope. We have to go back to the first one somehow. That's okay. I will get started. So I want to share a story. I have a good friend named Jen who is in senior level management in her career. And she is a go-getter, a high achiever like all of you. And she's also one of the most optimistic and positive women I know. And she moved out of state, excuse me, just a few weeks before the pandemic hit last year for her career, for her job. And her kids flew the nest for college and career. And her aging parents still live here in Pennsylvania. She hasn't seen them for almost a year. And Jen and I have been friends since middle school. And it's one of those long-standing friendships where we may not speak for a few weeks or even a few months, but we pick right back up wherever we left off. And I reached out to her a few weeks ago and just catching up. And she said to me, yeah, sort of as a passing comment, I'm having a hard time. And she just kind of nonchalantly kept going. And I was putting away laundry in my bedroom, and I stopped short and sat down on my bed and said, hold up. If you are saying you're having a hard time, that means you're really having a hard time. What's up? And she said to me, yes, I'm fine at work. Everything's okay there. It's just, I am feeling so stuck. I'm not feeling like myself. I am really feeling lonely and disconnected, and I don't know what to do with myself. And so this is the thing with us high achieving women. We often will get done. We rise to the occasion. We get done whatever needs to get done. And we often will, when we go all day long, we're putting out fires, we're taking care of everything. We crash into bed in the evening, falling fast asleep, or we stare at the ceiling with insomnia. We get up the next morning and do it all over again. And so some of our hamster wheels are stress and overwhelm and putting out those fires. And some of our hamster wheels the past year have also felt like boredom, monotony, and Groundhog Day. And so, we have these two rock stars here, Amy and Kara, who I bow down to, on the front lines, these daily massive acts of courage that I can't even imagine. And then those of us who aren't on the front lines sometimes feel like, what's wrong with me? I'm not there facing it. But to recognize that even if we're not on the front lines, we're still committing these daily acts of courage, maybe in little ways throughout the past year. So the good news is that we can learn to create and carve out little bits of time for self-care so we can cope and thrive in the midst of all of this chaos. And how do we do this? Next slide. We need to breathe before we can be empowered to achieve. And you can go to the next slide. And this is mindful empowerment. And so breaking that down, mindfulness is paying attention to what happens in the moment with an attitude of kindness. So we've all had that experience of getting in our car and driving somewhere on autopilot. We go somewhere familiar, we get there, and we recognize, I don't even remember making a turn, passing this landmark. We were operating on autopilot, and our minds were either in the future, worrying, what ifing, running through our to-do list, or in the past, rehashing a recent conversation or a long ago memory. So mindfulness pulls us out of automatic pilot, which is so powerful because with a little bit of mindfulness, we're able to choose our response in situations rather than just reacting out of habit. We can choose where we place our attention and be more intentional in the direction we want to head. And mindfulness is a coping tool that can help us lead and make choices, not from that place of fear or scarcity, but from a place of calm wisdom. And research shows that mindfulness can help increase our capacity for resilience, connection, creativity, and joy. And it helps us step off that hamster wheel here and there throughout the day, out of automatic pilot, and helps us create a little bit more calm, balance, and success, even in the midst of a pandemic. So mindful empowerment then, you can go to the next slide, is using this self-awareness and calm to unleash our strengths and superpowers so we can cope and even thrive in an upward spiral of purpose and success. So you might be thinking, well, this all sounds amazing. How exactly do I step off this hamster wheel and access some calm? And you can go to the next slide. Other than downing an entire pint of Ben and Jerry's in one sitting, not that we would ever do this. And great question. So I'm going to lead you through or teach you 3 mindful empowerment tips. And we're going to get started with a brief guided meditation. And you can go to the next slide. So inviting you as you sit at home to sit up nice and tall in your chair and either closing your eyes or just letting your gaze rest softly in front of you so you're not distracted by looking around. And taking a couple of long, slow, deep breaths in through the nose and out through the mouth. Doing that a few times and really lengthening those inhales and exhales, noticing how different it might feel to take those deep inhales and exhales versus how we tend to breathe throughout the day, which is often very shallowly in our chests. So letting the breath settle now, become natural, however that is, and taking a moment to just connect to our body sensations. We often don't pay much attention to our bodies unless they're causing us difficulty. So we want to familiarize ourselves with all of these subtle sensations. Noticing where the body's making contact with your chair, where it's not. You might let your shoulders drop almost like they're melting and softening those small muscles around your mouth and eyes, brow, forehead. And then when you're ready, you can bring your attention to the belly and relaxing this area of the belly. You might even place your hand there and noticing as we do this, we can recognize there's a subtle rising and falling here as the breath comes and goes. So now we're letting the breath be however it is. We're just feeling it and sensing it. There's a very subtle rising and falling. And as we do this, it doesn't take long before we recognize that our attention drifts off, which is perfectly normal. We might think about what we still need to do tonight before we get to bed or what we're having for dinner, whatever it is. We notice our attention drifts off. We gently bring it back to this home base of the breath in the belly and begin again, sensing that rising and falling, the inhale and the exhale. So before you open your eyes, bringing your attention now back to the entirety of the body, sitting here breathing. You might relax any areas that you find have tensed up, taking a nice deep inhale and exhale if you'd like. And when you're ready, you can open the eyes. So this is meditation. And the biggest myth I encounter around meditation, people will say, I've tried to meditate, didn't work. My mind is so busy, I can't stop my thoughts. well, welcome to the human race. We never are able to stop our thoughts. It's not about that. It's about familiarizing ourselves with our busy minds and all of the thoughts. And that's where the power lies, because when we have more self-awareness and recognize what's going on, we have some choice with what to do with it. We're not automatically, unconsciously pulled into action. So that is one way mindfulness is a superpower. So that's accessing some calm. You can practice a little bit of guided meditation. Tip number 2 is to live in the and with our strengths. So living in the and, when we get quiet and stop and step off the hamster wheel, we might recognize some really challenging, uncomfortable emotions that show up. Grief, trauma, sadness, anxiety. It feels really uncomfortable. And what we automatically do when this shows up is we want to avoid, we want to push away, stuff it down, which isn't going to be helpful or healthy. So what we want to do is allow it, feel it, spend a few minutes with it, and look up, look around, and see what we're grateful for, what we can love around us, what we can celebrate. So for example, I have 2 kids. I have a college sophomore and a 3rd grader. And I can feel really sad about the fact that they've missed out on traveling abroad, college parties, sports, and so forth. And at the same time, I can be grateful that we've had more time together and that in some respects, our lives have slowed down. And so that's living in the and. When we get quiet and do that, we can also get in touch with our strength. And we all are strong and resilient and adaptable as we see. And what research shows is that women tend to instinctively come together during times of crisis. So point number 3, or tip number 3, is to take intentional action. So when we get calm and we're not just putting out fires and throwing spaghetti out the wall all the time, we want to be really intentional about how we take that time for self-care. So knowing where you fall on the continuum of overdoing or underdoing. Some people need a little more momentum, some movement. So for you, you might say, okay, 5 minutes, a couple of times a day, I'm going to step up away from my desk and stretch, or even get outside for a quick walk. If you need to access calm, then maybe your intention is 5 minutes a day, I'm going to do a guided meditation. And for some of us who are maybe overdoers, putting a lot on our plates, we want to deliberately, an act of self-care is to rest, to stop. So maybe it's grabbing a book and a cup of tea and making ourselves sit down on the couch and stop, or even, God forbid, take a nap. So depending on where your season of life is, what's called for, what you're craving, you deserve that. We need to give ourselves permission for little acts of self-care. And so back to my friend Jen, just in case you were wondering, I touched base with her. She brought some of this back into her life. She had let go of her meditation and prayer practice in the morning, got back in touch with that. She's scheduled more regular calls with a few friends every week and joined her local chamber of commerce. So she's good. So above all, and you can go to the next slide, I want you all to really feel and remember this tonight, that we women have superpowers. We do hard things. We can all look back on our lives, especially the past year, and find evidence of times when we were courageous and strong and resilient. And this is not to say that we aren't now being tested and that we feel strong all of the time. It's quite the opposite. We need to work, though, to take a little bit of self-care, unleash our superpowers so we can lead from a place of calm rather than fear. We need to breathe to be empowered to achieve. So what one intentional action step will you get started with today so we can all get through this together? Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Shonda. That was fabulous. I have one question that we'd like to ask that was sent in previously, and it is there such a thing as work-life balance?
So many people will tell me there is no such thing, but I disagree. I think it depends on, back to, I think it was Kara, your perfection is the enemy of the good. So it's all about expectations. that I see work-life balance as a very fluid recalibration, ongoing basis, but we need to pay attention to it. We don't always have control over it, but when we do, can we kind of be on the lookout and recalibrate when we need to be finding a little more self-care? And usually women, we can always use a little more self-care.
Absolutely. So we have about 4 minutes left. And I don't see much in the chat. Is there any brave soul there who would like to share a 30-second I'm COVID good story?
Hi, you're welcome. I'm just gonna go for it, I guess. So COVID was definitely at first very difficult for me because I have obviously never experienced anything like that before in my life. And even though as like the world, we were all experiencing it together, there were some times where I've just never felt more alone, and it was really hard mentally at first, but it gave me so much time to think about myself and focus on what goals I really wanted to work towards and what I like as a person, what hobbies I want to stick with, what maybe isn't making me happy anymore. And just it was just a really good time for just some self-discovery and finding out what I like. So I'm thankful for that and my friends who definitely helped me through it, and I helped them. But it was good and bad. I would say more bad, obviously, because it's a pandemic, but it definitely did have its upsides.
Well, that's great. That's really good to hear. And thank you so much for being brave and speaking up. With that, I'm going to now turn it back over to Lynn, who's got a few closing remarks, and we have something also special to share with you as well.
So I want to thank all the presenters, the challenges you face as doctors, epidemiologists, network managers, family caregivers, and high achievers provided really valuable perspective for all of us and takeaways for our own lives. At Da Vinci, we often say science is the solution. You'll see that Caroline has that on her background slide. And the work that all of you do, we think that science is more important than ever. And the work that all of you do as scientists, as healthcare professionals, the work that we do as science educators is so, so important. So hopefully we can inspire those young people that are on this program to consider pursuing careers in the STEM field. Thank you again for everyone who attended tonight, and I hope you all got as much out of this as I did. Before we say goodnight, I want to share a little bit more on the WISE initiative at the Da Vinci Science Center. We have a number of programs and events throughout the year to introduce students to STEM careers and to provide female STEM professionals with the opportunity to network and support each other. In addition to our annual WISE Forum and Dinner, we host Women in STEM Career Connection field trip days, a STEAM Girls After School Club, Girl Scout Day and Camp-In programs, and evening networking events for practicing STEM professionals. I hope that you will mark your calendars now for our 7th annual WISE Forum and Dinner. We're really optimistic. I think I'm encouraged by what folks said tonight, that we'll be able to have this in person, including the WISE Mentoring Dinner and our WISE panel discussion. The event's scheduled for Tuesday, October 12th, 2021. We have an incredible panel of distinguished female leaders in STEM, assembled from a variety of backgrounds and including Julie Louise Gerberding, former head of the Center for Disease Control. So we hope that you can join us. You can learn more about the WISE initiative or get involved if you aren't already by visiting the website on the screen right now based at Da Vinci, and also following us on LinkedIn. And of course, if you'd like to support the initiative financially, you can do that through our website as well. Thank you so much. And I'd like to send all of you off with a very short video of young ladies who will inspire you as much as they inspired me. Please do send us your feedback on this program and other work that we're doing for women in STEM. We'd love to hear from you. Welcome to the Da Vinci Science Center. Through our Women in Science and Engineering initiative, we offer a variety of programs throughout the year for girls to meet practicing STEM professionals and for women to network and support one another. Our signature program is the Women in Science and Engineering Forum.
I think it's fun for girls to see female engineers as a role model so that they can picture themselves being engineers when they grow up.
You don't have to be a boy to be smart, and you can just be a scientist no matter what gender you are.
Through these kinds of experiences, we can help build an ecosystem of support for women and girls in the region to help fill the demand for growing STEM jobs.
When I see other women scientists, it makes me feel happy, excited, and it's fun.